So this entrepreneur that I was talking about earlier, they were telling me that they were having, they're having anxiety attacks and it was preventing them from sleeping, etc. Right? And I was like, so? They're like, well, I'm really working on it. And I was like, why? And they were like, looked at me cross-eyed, and I was like, how long have you been working on this? They were like, 8 months. And I was like, are you less anxious than you were before? They're like, well, I think a little bit. And I was like, do you think you would be a little bit less anxious if you just did jack shit and waited 8 months from when you were bad until now? And they were like, well, maybe. I was like, time does heal lots of wounds. I was like, so you spent all this time to get this little outcome, and you could have just let time happen and probably had the same outcome, right? Right. I was like, but let's take it one step further. Why didn't you tell me how many bowel movements you had yesterday? It was relevant. Exactly. So why are you sharing with me that you have panic attacks? Because you think it's meaningful. You derive meaning. Your brain is telling you that this is something that is a problem. So the thing is that the deeming of the thing a problem is the problem. And trying to change it or transform the meaning into something else is, in my opinion, just as bad, because the way that you created the mess that you are in a vicious cycle of reinforcement, is that you found a thing and then you said, I will give this meaning, and then you spent the rest of your time trying to transform the meaning. When if you want to solve the problem, the experience of having the problem solved is to not think about the problem at all. What it is actually reversing the process that created meaning to begin with, which is removing meaning altogether. I'm saying this because I've had so many things that I've struggled with in my life that I would consistently obsess about over and over and over again. Oh, I don't want to have that happen again. Oh, I don't want to have that happen again. And then it would happen. And so, in my opinion, the only way to overcome these issues is you can slap the fuck happiness concept on it, but it's to destroy the meaning of the thing itself and let it shrink into irrelevance. My opinion, most of the psychological problems that we deal with are better dealt with not by trying to directly combat them, but by not giving them the power of our attention. And there's a big difference here. I'm not saying the thought of anxiety comes up and you say, oh, I don't want to think about it, because then it's fear. Fear gives it power. Shame gives it power. It's not that. It's looking at it and saying, why are you bringing this up? This is irrelevant. This is a non-issue.
You have finite and infinite games, right? Finite games where you have known players, agreed upon rules, and an outcome that wins the game, right? And then infinite game, you have known and unknown players, no rules, and the point of the game is to keep the game going. And what happens is that people apply finite rules to infinite games, and then they wonder why it's not working.
What's an example?
So a finite game would be like baseball. Know the players. At the end of the game, the person you tally up the ones with the most runs, and you win. And you can't hold the ball and run it around the bases. Like, there's rules of play. With an infinite game, the Vietnam War is a simple example that Simon Sinek gives, which is basically the U.S. lost the Vietnam War because they were applying a finite structure, which is we're going to win this war, and the Vietnamese people were playing an infinite game structure, which is we're going to stay alive and keep fighting. And as long as someone is staying alive and keeping fighting, they will beat the person who's trying to end something. And so the infinite frame always conquers the finite. And the thing is that most of the games worth playing are infinite. And so if you were trying to get in shape, you don't win getting in shape. The point is to stay in shape for the rest of your life. You don't win at marriage. The point is to stay married. You don't win at business. The point is to stay in business and keep doing business. And the point of the game is to keep playing. And I think and I would imagine success, if you put all of those things together, it's an infinite game. And so the point of success is to do the things that make you successful. And so if you're doing the things that are making you successful, then you are by definition winning. And I think that for me, redefining what is a perfect day and living as many of those days in a row as I possibly can, to me, that's winning. And I obviously have a relatively contrarian worldview, but which is that, like, when we die, nothing happens, and we know what it was like to die because we've all been dead before, which is before we were alive. But I don't think that what I will do will ultimately matter in 500 million years. And so that kind of eliminates a lot of the pressure for me around, like, the external outcome. Sure, I'm human, there are definitely motivators, but if I can just over time chip away at how much that weighs on the scale, and I can keep putting more and more coins on the other side towards the infinite game of, like, the point of the game is to keep playing. And, like, there are some things that I remind myself over and over again. It's just like, the point of the game is to keep playing. That's the point. My request of everyone and I've requested this of myself, is that when I go into trying to learn something, that I do not give myself a binary outcome of did this work or did it not work, but instead give myself the question, am I closer or further away from my goal? And I think that has been tremendously helpful. And so shifting our education expectations to, is this another brick on the bridge to where I'm trying to go? Or instead of, am I at my destination or not? And I think that this is probably one of the biggest things that you can do, or at least where it's been useful for me. And this is what I've tried to shift my neighbor's perspective for himself on, which is, it's kind of alignment with that kind of investor mindset, which is, if I were to look over a 5-year time horizon and I were to continue to acquire skills like this, and I put more and more bricks on my bridge, by the end of that period, would I be better or worse off? And likely it'd be better, but you will be worse off if you keep trying to build a new bridge, right? And that's why when you jump from opportunity to opportunity, a lot of times you can never get to where you're trying to go because you take 2 steps of progress and say, oh, I'm not there, binary outcome, therefore I will start something else. And it's only after failing 3, 4, 5, 6 things that on the 7th thing, you had enough acquired skills from your first 6 failures that you are actually able to make it all the way across the bridge.
It's like when people say like, hey, work, set these goals and like the rest will take care of itself. It still makes the rest taking care of itself the reason that you're doing it, which means that it's actually not getting around it. When people are like, you got to be process driven. If you're like, if we focus on the process, the goals take care of themselves. It still means that the goals are important. So like you have to, if you want to make the transition from like a process driven life, which is like, I'm doing these things to do them, period, then the so that I can be happy, so that I can have a good marriage, so that I can have a meaningful life has to disappear from the equation. It has to be, I do them, period, not because, I do them.
What was that? You found out the 3 most common traits of highly successful people. Do you remember those?
Yeah, it was, it's so funny. A superiority complex. So the 3 most common traits of hyper successful people that they looked at, and it was interesting because there's the influencer world wants to be like, you have to wake up at 5 or you have to do cold plunges or whatever the fuck, right? But the thing but there was actually very few that they all had in common. So number 1 was that they had a superiority complex. They thought they were better than other people and that they deserved more. The second is that they suffered from massive insecurity and feeling that they would never be enough. And third, they had impulse control. And so you've got this combination of people who are like, I want to do this big thing. So this big toward thing. And they've got this big away pain that's like, I'm never going to be enough. I always have to do more. And then they have impulse control that keeps them focused on the goal without seeing the woman in the red dress or getting pursued by her. And that, like, so it's like shoot high, have a big thing that motivates, like have a big tiger behind you and stay on the path.